Jambe Yong Lo Sha Za Lui Kong Ge Lu De Jen Nye Jen Nye Tra Nam Ta Rab Salave Jen Nye Deng Chi Jen Zai Chir Nye Je Tu Kra Le Wang Zai Kong Da Si Be Chun Ra Ma Re Men Tam Dung E Che Ze We Ro Soi Kun Lai Pu Je Tar Ze Yin Lai Chu Ju Yong Den Song Ru Da Lai Che Du Nye Mo Nye Nung E Jia Duan Duan Ze Jen Ma Re Men Se Re Dung Ra Nyu Gu Chi Nye Chen Ze Ra Zhe Nam Den Ne Sa Ju Tar Yuan Den Lu Zo Jia Se Tu Yu Gu Chun Tra Chu Dan Chu Nye Jen De Da Lu Men Se Jan Be Yong Lai Du Arabazanade, Amarabazanade, Ramzanade, 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 Amarabazanade, Ramzanade, 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 Amarabazanade, Ramzanade, 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 Ramzanade. Amaraba Zanade, Ramzanade, 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 Amaraba Zanade, Ramzanade, 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 Amaraba Zanade, Ramzanade, 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 Amaraba Zanade, Zaden Jeje, Jenra Vizreje, Dalu Demoman Barab Srane. Ca dans des jeux, j'en dois t'envoyer l'autre pop, non va t'ardo, so, n'yembe pas d'un jig d'un son de dra, tambe chuda, singe dra drapa, tamje semba kunjon zai niebe, shabla zung zuge norvedo, dungara jaso, tenta megra wa, indrove zola, jive sa je, wo. Jamia Shana Durje Jenreze, Saye Nimbo, Deva Nambras, Namge Nimbo Shamba Gondozon, Neve Sejen Jela Shaje, Senden Poran Jigme Chotu, Jeme Tuje Sole Magendo, Epumoran Jen, Jendema, Jayam Dema Chuge Sheba, Zoro Sarap Gundo, Sije Tanyele. Tamke Samu Shagi Yong Zongxin, Shongchum Yinpe Lamken Karma Pa, Michi Debe Chigu Zuge Du. Lasso, number Lingye, Tene, Japsum Dove Semtang, Shongchup to Sem Jebe, Sem Rinpoche number Yesu Tene, Tambe Chu Seronang.
So, as always, please begin by taking refuge in the three jewels and generate the body-mind, and with that as your basis, listen attentively to the explanations that are to be given.
Lasso, that church damchambu jignang ne, Trinipa, Nipenjuk, Tenima, Shugu.
So, today, the remaining explanations of the second seal will be given.
Tatela Nindo Dunga Shet Sal Tori Gitenchen Ke Metang Lama Yin Shet Sane Ta Dokam Gala to put it down, then Zukam Tan Zumit Kam Lasso.
So, in the previous sessions, we've gone through the various types of suffering found in the three lower existences, as well as in the higher existences of human beings and demigods. Today, the explanations concern the gods of the desire realm, as well as those inhabiting the realm of form and the realm of no form. So, in terms of individuals who live in godlike circumstances, therefore named gods. Within the desire realm, there are 6 basic levels of them there. And in all of these existences, there is a constant and an abundant presence of sense objects that one simply comes in contact with and can enjoy effortlessly. If one were to compare sense objects which, when interacted with, result in pleasurable experiences, if one were to compare those available in the realm of human beings with those available in the realm of gods within the desire realm, then what's available in this context, as it were, within the 6 levels of gods in the desire realm is far, far more abundant, more pleasurable, 100-fold more pleasurable and abundant in those various 6 levels of the gods of the desire realm.
Then concept chese yang migir lo le na migir lo celom bom to be
and the lifespan there is much longer than the lifespan of human beings. Some of these gods may live for 100,000 or more years. Now, when looking at the various 6 basic levels of gods in the desire realm, the 2 lower ones, here suffering is experienced.
Okay. La injecting Humala Samna Tang to Ta Karsa Coranso de Mindu Tene Depe Nampe Dunge Consola Yore Son.
Kongma Shila Döjen Jöpa de Tong, de Rangla Matop, Teneda de Matope Dungal. So, what type of suffering is at hand? Well, an example would be the following, namely that those who inhabit the 2 first of the 6 levels do see, as it were, the circumstances of the gods on the higher levels, and this causes them suffering in that the gods on the higher levels have access to sense pleasures that are more abundant and so on and so forth, and more pleasurable than those within the first two of the 6 levels, and that causes mental suffering, jealousy, and the like. And from time to time, they do experience war because of the demigods waging war with them. So the 2 first of the 6 levels aren't free of suffering. It's not the case that there is but sense pleasure. The sense pleasures are interrupted by perturbed mental states when seeing what is not available to one, as well as due to what happens during the wars with the demigods, evidently. However, in terms of all 6 levels, in the context of suffering, there is a common denominator, namely that of having to face death, while knowing that in one's next rebirth, the same good circumstances will probably not be at hand, that one heads for something worse. Now, if we look at the basic types of suffering among humans, you have birth, aging, sickness, and death. Now, suffering in the context of birth, aging, and sickness do not occur in any of these 6 levels, or on any of these 6 levels. Now, death is at hand, and sometime prior to death, the gods become aware of that this is what will happen to them in the near future, simply because the virtue responsible for their rebirth in these good circumstances have come to an end. This they know, and that causes a great deal of suffering. And there are various signs which indicate this. One of them is that their clothing, which is the clothing of gods, and therefore always very comfortable, fresh, etc. The clothing starts to smell of decay, and that indicates to the individual who wears the clothing that death is not far away, it's going to happen in the near future. And at times, the person who will die in the near future starts sweating. prior, during the lifetime of a so-called God, the body doesn't produce any waste products, such as sweat. So the fact that the God in question starts sweating is an indication of decay, physical decay, that tells the individual that death is at his door.
And
a foul-smelling scent starts in terms of the body. And the flower garlands the gods supposedly wear, the flowers start to wither. And apparently these individuals, they live in their private mansions, as it were, and without any proper reason, the individual in question, the individual who nears his death, starts feeling uncomfortable in his very comfortable and beautiful mansion, and has the urge to leave. And the thought, all people who are near and dear to me here are avoiding me. There is the feeling of that everyone with whom one has spent one's life on good terms are now abandoning one. And so he starts thinking about reasons for why all of this is happening to him. And in consequence, he understands, he realizes that death is at his door. And these individuals have what one calls worldly clairvoyance, and so the individual in this situation makes use of that, and he sees the circumstances of his next rebirth. And as the circumstances in this realm are godlike, even the best of circumstances among humans seem awful to this individual, and then one can just start to imagine how the individual would react if seeing that he's about to take rebirth in any of the three lower existences. It would cause excruciating suffering. That knowledge would. So those who inhabit these 6 levels, during their lifetime there, everything seems perfect. They lack nothing, and circumstances are exceedingly comfortable, pleasurable, and so on. However, This rebirth, as any other rebirth, does come to an end, and then change is at the individual's door, and that will cause great suffering.
That's to come down, zoom to come me la, jebe latin on la. Dungar munjuro come here, things in the Shawayinde.
Then we have the two higher realms, that of form and that of no form. And here, during the lifetime, there is no suffering at all, of any kind, on any of these levels, simply because those who inhabit these existences are individuals who continually rest in a stable meditation state. And these lifespans are exceedingly long, the ones in those existences. The longest lifespan within these realms is the one that spans over an entire so-called intermediate era or kalpa. So an entire era is divided into intermediate periods. And a lifespan here can last for an entire intermediate period. Even so, once the individual's capacity for remaining in this stable meditation state comes to an end, then death occurs, and the individual will take rebirth elsewhere according to the predispositions in his mind stream that have resulted from actions of the past. So these individuals as well have not overcome rebirth in existences that are inferior and that entail a great deal of suffering. So wherever one is reborn within a so-called impure world system, none of those existences make for eternal well-being. There is a sutra, a lecture given by Buddha Shakyamuni in the context of him encountering his father, and the father then asking his son, now Buddha Shakyamuni, questions, and his son Buddha Shakyamuni then explaining various things to his father. The Buddha, it's recorded in this sutra, told his father that any level of existence as to an impure world system is a flawed existence. Therefore, he said, he advised his father, you should turn your back on preoccupation with any of those existences and rather see the facts which would presumably induce a sense of sorrow in your mind. For example, the Buddha continued, the three realms are like an immense prison, he told his father. The Buddha told his father. Now, anyone imprisoned would want to be freed from the prison. And the prisoner would try whatever he could do in order to get out of the prison. Therefore, it's very important that all of us do what it takes in order to get out of samsara's prison. Yes. Now, 7 years after his enlightenment, Buddha Shakyamuni went to see his father. And at the time, Buddha Shakyamuni was staying in the city-state of Rashgir, and his father's kingdom was that of Kapilavastu, being the capital of the kingdom, and there was quite some distance between Rashgir and Kapilavastu. Now, the Buddha, the Bhagavan, at the time was accompanied by many of his disciples who had attained arhathood and who all, like the Buddha, had the capacity to swiftly travel from one place to another, and that capacity, when witnessed by onlookers, appear to be a miracle. So very often these circumstances, such as the Buddha and disciples of his being able to move from A to B very swiftly, so swift that it would not be possible for anyone else, compared to flying through space, and they were even seen to have moved from A to B in that way on many occasions. And this is what occurred in terms of the Buddha and his entourage going from Rashgir to Kapilavastu.
Korang say a component today, Jigme Lingpa Hakko the Colle, Jewel Simpson Legio. Jamden de Coa Dungere Son and Jewel Sim Legio. They millet do Jewel Sims and Corvin de Sushin and Della Jewel Simti Mena and the Tarwa the top two my
Ta sangji gi ta ende chi ki gopang tobyo ra ta yang sangji gi yabla sungpa tela yi che mi to erego
yi che mi to mare korang gata chu
aha
ne pun de treasury sha some.
Now the Buddha's father evidently was so excited and happy about what his son had achieved, this high spiritual attainment, that of enlightenment, that even though the Buddha told him about suffering and the shortcomings of worldly existences, he wasn't able to take it in, because he was just filled with joy over the fact that his son had attained enlightenment. So he sort of, I suppose, blocked out what the Buddha said to him or explained to him about suffering and the need for generating a sense of sadness in terms of suffering and shortcomings in worldly existences. His mind was so filled with joy over his son's accomplishment that he couldn't take in what his son was telling him.
Tene tanimachi la sanje ke hlai korla kashu nangyo
Kapilavastu la
yeah, yeah.
Now, during the time the Buddha spent in Kapilavastu, at one point, a number of gods had descended to Kapilavastu in order to seek the advice and teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni. And his father, becoming aware of this gathering, went there wanting to participate, wanting to listen to the Buddha's teachings. However, there are 4 specific gods within the desire realm who are very, very powerful and who sort of rule part of the god realm within the desire realm. And they apparently were guarding the entrances to this gathering and told the Buddha's father as he approached that you will not be admitted. You do not have the good fortune which would permit you to participate in this gathering. So they simply wouldn't let him in, as it were. And of course, the Buddha's father was struck by grief, not being able to attend a lecture given by his own son. And his sense of grief was very strong, to the point where he turned to his memory of one of the explanations that his son had given him previously, which was about the fact that all things are in impure world systems are, well, all things, whether in impure world systems or beyond, all of it is empty, and therefore a self-entity of sorts, a real reality of sorts, can't be found anywhere. And he became absorbed in his recollection of what the Buddha had taught in this regard to him, to the extent where at the end of the period of him being immersed in the recollection of those teachings, he attained a realization of emptiness. Next, we'll continue with the third of the four seals, which is that of what we just talked about, namely the fact that all things are empty and do therefore not entail a real reality, a self-entity of sorts. However, we won't go into the explanations yet. First, Khenpo Rinpoche will answer some of the questions from the last question and answer period that there wasn't time to answer at the time. No, kavare shigen kong. De do digi tsen karare.
Jasan do tigi do kandina songsha sigyorwa. Mare.
De do chatsan chigyomare, do shenta chikinangla ergo.
Do chasan yuare lan do chiginan zu tsutön sharwa. Nyanginan deba chimbun do yinan do tön shavre.
Re yine nyangele debe do ere.
Re hachang yewo chiyore.
Dadi korang ditsen shikrede nangla.
Yeah.
So the teachings the Buddha gave in this regard are part of a more extensive sutra, or the sutra where you find these explanations or these teachings. Is the sutra named the Nirvana Sutra.
Tilendo jedu mango yore ta tinde chignan sutan shavre.
Reda chatsangdela, yeah, tadi shutayin. The next question is dela yang drelva yorevis.
Dotel dreva peje yusamare.
There is also the question, is there any commentaries to this sutra? And Khenpo Rinpoche says, to his knowledge, no.
Yina yang sanje ki song bendo tsangma ki dudön rao chigi. Shambar yiba ki song chigi ngenje nyong ti nangla dudön tendo.
However, a summary as to these contents of this sutra was authored by the fourth Shamarpa. It's in fact a treatise where the fourth Shamarpa gives a summary of all that's recorded within the body of scriptures that record all lectures of the Buddha, the Kanjur. The next question is, all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. Why? Why couldn't a conditioned phenomenon be permanent?
That condition yimbal tenne permanent chadigiorwa.
Impermanent chadigiorwa.
Impermanent chadigiorwa.
Now, a phenomenon cannot be permanent in that it is conditioned. Da permanent kare gogiyo me chi sungu mari.
That impermanent or permanent.
Permanent.
Permanent
This
is so one first has to give thought to what permanent means. That which is permanent doesn't ever change. It is fixed and static. Penna de tak chena ba ko den de thu gin de me do tin do. Penna chuku senken the. Jochin tender tene to go marve samdam proch.
Now in the next question someone is asking whether enlightenment is conditioned and therefore impermanent, because this person has drawn the conclusion that enlightenment is the outcome of the practices done while on the path. And if that were to hold true, yes, enlightenment would be then impermanent. However, that is not the case. Why?
Choku singing the chuni ranre. Maranso sem chuni de ranre. Dile sadu che wata juchin tender ke sadu zesha watan mare.
So, the Sanskrit word dharmakaya points to enlightenment at the level of Buddha, the enlightened state. And Buddha, the enlightened state, is a natural presence within. It's the true nature of the mind. And the Dharmakaya, synonymous with Buddha, the enlightened state, is not about a newly produced phenomenon which at one point manifests because of the efforts of an individual. The true nature within has always been there. It's not a product of efforts or an external agent or anything else. It is not a newly produced state. It was a state that was always there, but due to obscurations, the individual was unaware of it. So it's as if the individual who attains enlightenment discovers what was there the whole time. So enlightenment is not a product of the coming together of a number of causes and conditions, and these causes and conditions interacting and producing, newly producing, a state as it were. Enlightenment is ever present. It's therefore referred to as the natural presence within. And therefore it's not a conditioned phenomenon. Not being a conditioned phenomenon, it's not impermanent. Korve dungal samlotang tene.
Metakpa yimbala samlotang. Tene zunju mangochene. Chödrak goyet kararesana. Ngaranso chuk ngundu churtab mare. Di ngaranso zoechabe trimand part taktabre.
So what a practitioner does on the path, in terms of contemplating suffering, acquiring knowledge of impermanence, putting a lot of efforts into whatever practices are done, the aim of that is not to, or the purpose of that is not to produce the manifestation of Buddha, the enlightened state, meaning that all these actions and all the effort involved happens in the hope of making enlightenment arise. Enlightenment which was not there previously. That's not at all the purpose. So the purpose is not the obtaining of some state. The purpose of all these efforts is to eradicate the obscurations, the workings of the worldly mindset which prevent the individual from resting in the natural presence of enlightenment within. So it's never about obtaining enlightenment or accomplishing enlightenment, because it's a natural presence within from before. So it's not something that one can produce. It's not something that one can make happen. It has already happened. So all of these efforts have the purpose of removing that which prevents the individual from clearly knowing what was there all along.
Next
question. The question is, Khenpo spoke about a list of 4 elements, which are the basic components of the material world, and a list of 5 elements. What's the difference between the 2 lists? And why is there 2 different lists, one with 4 elements and one with 5 elements?
Namke kam singe konjepa samtigi chal ta shaurma.
Yeah, the 2 lists are identical except for when one adds the 5th of the 5 elements, so-called elements, which is simply about empty space which provides room for the other four to arise in and operate within. So there isn't really a big difference between the two lists. It's just that one lists the four first only and the other lists all five.
Pena ngagi juiten jugana the come to din song do ti kabla tanda ti ngagi la number shape come singet jargre.
Tene number shape come da di korve senda kogo grava. E kande ji kogo.
Korwa ta nyangde ni ka ke semtel ko.
Tene number shape sekende number shene gi shape parava.
Ya ta so
ti di kande ji.
Shape comes in and do it.
In the Buddhist Tantras, one finds a sixth element, which is that of knowledge itself, knowledge-ness, as it were. The next question is, Khenpo spoke about the world of hellish existences. Is it a world we can be reborn in, or is it a metaphor for great suffering that we can experience as humans or in the world of humans? Orang nechik reda nyalva sekindi nechik retam dungal genyong wachik la kogo geretam.
Tate terwala. Tachetan dog kumbata de sena nechik ta migin nende tunang chire kan nyalwe nende tunang chire.
Well, when one speaks of a location, for example, the world of humans or the world of hellish existences, the world isn't really about a world in a specific geographical location, as it were. It's rather about a world within which there are specific circumstances experienced by those inhabiting the world in question. And both the world of hellish existences and the world of humans, for example, are illusion-like. It's not a matter of a real location in some place geographically, as it were. No.
Penandi chuan ang popote ke tu nang la tande man zuen jik den je kam de yuare de longba chi ne chi ran ro na shin nyala le yang longba shin da chi na dem ro yuare ve gong pi chwa ro chi re shan wa.
Now, if we think about the world we live in, the world of humans, human beings today travel from one country to another very frequently, and perhaps the person who asked the question is under the impression that in terms of the different parts of an impure world system, going from one to the other would be similar to traveling from one country to another country, but that's not the case, Khenpo explains.
Chi si nganzo trulben tong de yue jiring na de nganzo shipho ta de nyalwen ji din sing ge je nganzo tong yo ko dan de tunang de tong de ba nang xin.
So if one takes the example given in the question of rebirth in a hellish existence, once reborn there, one finds oneself in the circumstances of the hellish existence in question in the same way as a child born into the world of humans simply finds himself in the circumstances of the world of humans. But the experiencing of the circumstances of the existence one is born into is not synonymous with that the existence at hand is a geographical location, a real world, as it were. Then, the next question is, Khenpo spoke about pranas and internal breathing. Is it the same thing? Daddy, kan det ikke hende? Tringe min dulle. Da lungtang. Sa var det da. Da det gjør Chila Juve Nangla Jöpe Lungraminra Jorva Den så chikbara chikre karere Mare le kanske le lungmare da lungsäcken de kirtametan lungsäcken tetang nangi guva chikbare da mare
Chetang yuwe chane drawa chire mato chikpa mare thara chira yuwa devre.
Kang la thara yore.
Penna nang yuwe long chi yorwa.
Re?
Shindu tamurwa. Siroto long de rakparwa.
Me de mare. Chi long gi triva mare.
Ona?
Long chirta merta long yorwa. Long. Sanang yuwe long.
Oh, re.
Tene Sanang nang du jöpe lung tang Sanang du guvani chikre tamare.
Chikpare.
Well, if I've understood the question right, it's about so-called prana, and there are many types, and I suppose the wording internal breathing is a reference to how those pranas move within the nadis, the channels where the pranas operate, as it were, or function. And if that is the question, the answer is yes. Internal breathing, as it were, would be a reference then to the movement of the pranas within. So it's about the pranas and their functions, as it were. And one can't really separate the two. It's one and the same thing, the prana and its function.
Dan denzu kor shifta shendo yona samanong denge long leu zigda tene te chin.
Now, there is a text in English called The Inner and the Profound, authored by the third Karmapa. And in this text, in this treatise, the third Karmapa explains the details of this prana and its functions. So, if the person who asked the question is interested in the topic, Khenpo advises him to read the chapter where the third Karmapa explains this. Apparently there is some translation of this treatise in English. Khenpo Rinpoche says he has no idea as to the quality of the translation itself. However, he knows that there is one. The next question is, pranas and mind, are they one and the same thing? If not, what's the difference between them? Lungdang semni chik redam chu kakani redam kakani yingyönani teni deni la drelva karayödam.
Ta te shifta de nge tanda shushu de saman handa no sigda chen yong kre mato dele shifta hie go chona mongbo shuye yorwa.
Well, in terms of explaining this, that would require a lot of time. It's a vast topic. Khenpo Rinpoche says there is a segment of the same text authored by the third Karmapa, where the third Karmapa explains the details of this, and he advises the person who asked the question to read that part of the text in question. One should know in general that in terms of so-called prana, there are many types of it. The next question is, prana and wind element in the list of the four elements, are they the same? If not, what's the difference between them? No, these two are different. They're not the same. Of course, both are about movement, but it's not the same type of movement, as it were. Then the two factors which sustain vital prana, I suppose that would be solung. Past actions and merit, what is the difference between the two? Merit is the result of past virtuous actions, isn't it? Letang sönam nila tenne solung di netugiore sungare skema. Tenne deni ledang sönam ni gi Jeva kan det sig tjekogen du. Tivatiken tiki sönam ti depe chavala tenne mareve legi drebu mareve.
Ja, men legi drebu yang re tanda sönam sashi led chegin sönam de sagin rogogro.
Well, so-called merit results from past virtuous actions, but thing in the context of what the person who asked the question calls vital prana, the life force, I suppose it's a reference to. One also has to take into consideration the impact of actions in the present upon the life force. So you have virtuous actions of the past and you have virtuous actions in the present, hopefully ongoing throughout an entire lifespan. Those actions will also make for sustaining the life force. So it's not as if you just have the merit resulting from past actions sustaining the life force in this lifetime. The virtuous actions in the present throughout the lifetime will also contribute to sustaining the life force and thus maintaining life.
Pardonne mai ngar tu shukpan zungde gotsuksa mai ngar tu shukpan zungde ta sani gadu shig yona te pardu nge thanda solung de ne tu ndo.
So you have the mindset in the state between death and a new rebirth. There conception happens. From the moment of conception till the next death, as it were, at the end of that new lifetime. Yes,
Juchikte pena ngonsape lere ngon junipate sendela sabe sonamdre.
What determines the length of this new lifespan from conception till the end of that lifetime, till death, is merit in the context of past actions and actions of that entire lifespan, the present lifespan.
Tene tanga shidu tandenge misig tendu yebe solong senenda tsete zore yinayang.
Now, when that lifespan comes to an end, what happens is that there is nothing remaining which can keep the life force of this lifetime alive, as it were. It comes to an end. The life force of this lifetime comes to an end, and what remains, is the life force of the fundamental of the fundamental mind stream, and that's what exits the physical body at the time of death, and then you have the intermediate state again, the state between death and a new rebirth. Conception happens, and from the moment of conception, the life force of that lifetime will manifest and remain till the end of that lifetime. So the most basic type of prana in terms of sentient beings, taking one rebirth after the other, is the life force of the fundamental mind stream. Different from the life force of a lifetime.
Yang panjo ne tang chobu chaw yin na te hotra duga ji no ma de ran de cha gro ka shin ro na tin na shin pen na sonam tang le ten so de ten ne ko ji sok chen bu long de jewa yak sa le ne jewa duk sa le ne ten ro de gi ro nga za koron de la
so Khenpo long kun shigi
so long se la shin de
ri ra
de
da Khenpo de da ku Khenpo son jigre min noga ko che valenken de jindu de tse digi solong mare som de chiki kakare jeva jiktoga anyway so in terms of different rebirths and the different circumstances of them, the following would be an easy to understand example. Think of a person who has great personal wealth and who travels. That person would make bookings in high-end hotels because he can afford to live comfortably while traveling. Whereas a person who isn't that affluent, a person on a budget, would, when traveling, check into a cheap guest house. Both individuals are traveling, both are looking for a dwelling. One person can afford a better dwelling than the other. In the same fashion, in terms of the circumstances of the rebirth of individuals or the rebirths of individuals, some have accumulated a great deal of merit in the past and therefore end up in rebirths of good circumstances, where in the case of others that didn't happen, and therefore the rebirth or rebirths are rebirths in not so desirable circumstances, as it were. And there is often the question, who or what is it that takes rebirth? Well, it is the life force of the fundamental mind stream. That which makes for the fact that the mind never dies, the mind doesn't come to an end, as does the physical body. And then you tenida tse digi solung yora va ko da mi solung yina dindro solung yina de le la ra legera va
ja le ra legen do
de se go ergo.
Yes.
Then you have the life force of a specific lifetime. So you have the life force of a human being, you have the life force of an animal, you have the life force of a preta, etc., etc. And here you have a variation in terms of the extent of merit the individual has. That will determine the nature of the life force of a single lifetime. So the two are not synonymous, even though they have the same name, as it were, life force, but they are not identical, as it were. Of course, it's function-wise and so on, there might not be great differences. However, there is a difference in terms of subtle and coarse. And you have many kinds of prana, and some are more subtle than other types. And the most subtle prana is the one that makes for the inseparability between mind and prana.
Semge sarchane mind chepte, tongchane prana chepte. Thinking watching parwa. Yocha.
Saltong yermere va?
Yeah, saltong yermekta.
So, in terms of mind's true nature, as has been said previously or explained previously, you have two perspectives: the illuminating or enlightening perspective of mind's true nature, which is about knowledge. Here, enlightening knowledge, not worldly knowledge. And then you have the perspective of its emptiness, and that relates to so-called prana. So, knowledge and prana at the level of mind's true nature are inseparable. Det mato semjingi don chetu. You see, if mind was just emptiness, not much could happen, could it? How would the just empty mind perform the actions of, for example, manifesting in innumerable shapes and forms for the sake of benefiting others? That requires knowledge. And in this context, that of mind's true nature, it's enlightening knowledge that is at hand, not some sort of high intellectual capacity, worldly types of knowledge. It's a very different type of knowledge. So, all questions that were asked previously have been answered. Long